Hey, how's it going, everyone? This is Kevin from Audio Digital. I'm back with another video. And in this video, I want to go over some of the presets that I've made for Bitwig. And I made a set of about 24 presets that are going to be available for free for any Patreon subscriber. So these are all using standard devices and not using the grid, so they should work, I believe, in just about any version of Bitwig that you might have, including 16-track. So I just want to go over some of the techniques I use to create these. And in this video, we're going to explore some of the techniques to create essence of realism. I've always been a fan of realism in synthesis. And that can, for me, encompass anything from just something that sounds somewhat acoustic or has some depth, some kind of life to it, all the way to things like physical modeling. That's always been a kind of a passion of mine. And so I've learned some different techniques to incorporate what I would call aspects of realism into different presets. So I want to show you a little bit of a taste of that right now. So let's get into it. So right here, the first one I want to show you is a patch called PM Acoustic Bass. Now this preset is pretty much the same preset that's already a part of the Bitwig library. It's a grid patch, this one right here. And if you listen to them, they pretty much sound identical. But of course, this one only uses phase 4 and not the grid. So you can really do a lot with a much more simple synthesizer like phase 4. So let me just go over what I did. What are the elements here to make this thing sound somewhat realistic? And first, let me just talk about real quick about why this is interesting, at least to me. And that is because when you have something in pure synthesis, as opposed to using samples, you can bring out certain aspects of it. You can change it and morph it and do pretty much anything you want because you have complete control over every aspect of the sound, as opposed to with samples. There's less you can do to mess with a sample because it's basically a series of snapshots of the instrument. So this both has the elements of realism and at the same time is completely changeable. And I like the idea of something that sounds in between real and unreal. It has the attributes of something real, but yet doesn't sound like anything you've heard before. And I really find that interesting. I like the idea of creating new sounds or sounds that are different and haven't quite been realized, or the idea of making a acoustic instrument that is foreign and strange and kind of prepared piano stuff, or just like a 10-foot long bass or something like that, right? Like that sort of stuff interests me. Like I want to hear what that bass sounds like. So anyway, with something like this, we can stretch the boundaries of reality. So anyway, let me just go into how this is accomplished. First off, let's look at just the string sound, or actually let's look at the effects just briefly, and then we're going to turn them off so we can get just to the phase modulation sound here. And in this part here, we have a resonator bank, and that's really important to give us that wood type sound. And without it, it doesn't sound nearly as convincing, although it still has a lot of the character. This is just a little EQ to take off some of the high and low end, a chorus here, and then this is an amp that we can turn on for later, and then a reverb. So we're going to turn that off and just listen to the naked phase modulated sound. So the realism that we're getting out of this has to do with two different components. On top, we have like this string buzz, but let's focus on just the string sound itself. So here's the naked string sound. And the cool thing about this is that we can get this sort of sound just because of the flexibility of phase modulation or FM, which are usually the same thing. So basically, we're taking something that is one octave below the carrier here. I'm sorry, the carrier, and we're modulating it with an envelope. And let's look at the modulation here real quick. This is the envelope for the modulation. And the thing about phase modulation is that it's easy to get a lot of character out of it. You can create fairly complex waveforms easily. And the main challenge of it is that it can be a little hard to predict what's going to happen and how to get certain timbres. But once you get the basics down, you can kind of dial in the timbre that you want, or you can just experiment. But because it's so dynamic and because there's such a range of different timbres that you can get, even just using two oscillators, it really has a great deal of potential. So what we're doing here is using this basic kind of 1/2 type of relationship between these two oscillators, and then enveloping the intensity. And then we have some velocity sensitivity here that makes it sharper or duller when we're hitting it at different times. And that's an element of realism where we can change the amount of intensity to something based on the velocity, so we can put some performance into things. And other than that, we have this envelope right here, which changes the pitch. That kind of the pitch quickly dips down, and then comes up to pitch, which a lot of strings kind of have that kind of sweep up to the pitch. It gives a little bit more of a physicality to it. And let's see if we can hear the difference if I turn this off. It's subtle, but it's there. So anyway, that is the basic string sound. It doesn't sound nearly as convincing by itself, but a really major part of getting a sense of realism is adding some noise to a sound, because pretty much everything that's physical has some sort of a noise component to it, whether it's a woodwind type instrument, whether it's a string based or percussion or whatever it is. There's always going to be some sort of noise. And generally, synthesized sounds don't offer noise right out the gate because everything is so perfect and so controlled. So when you're sound designing and you want some realism, it's often a very good thing to add some noise, or to make sure some noise is included somewhere in the signal. So here we have what we call string buzz here. By itself, it's a little weird. And when you hear them separately, it a little bit throws off the illusion that it's part of the same sound, but when they're playing together, our brain kind of merges it into one system, and we have this sense that this string is vibrating and smacking up against some frets and so forth. So to get that sort of string buzz sound, what I did was to use this oscillator is basically not even operating on its own. Its own internal clock is turned off, and that's what 0 means. But you can still modulate even when things are turned down to 0. And what we have here is this really low frequency oscillator is modulating this kind of stationary oscillator here, at a really high intensity, and ultimately what we get out of it is kind of a really smacky kind of sound. That sounds kind of like something smacking up against some metal. And but it doesn't happen every time at the same intensity. And the reason for that is that we have set up this this random generator here every time to give us a random output from like 0 to 1, and then it is modulating this phase thing here so that sometimes the output of this is going to be 0 and sometimes it's going to be 1. When this puts out something over a certain threshold, it gives a 1. And when there's a 1 from this guy, then the envelope over here is going to open up a lot and give us, like in this case, give us a nice long, or a lot longer buzz from this oscillator. Other times it just gives us a bit of a click. And that's what we expect from a bass guitar or something. Not every time are you going to get the buzz, and the buzz isn't going to be exactly the same every time. So that randomness makes it feel more real and acoustic, right? And randomness is a big asset when you're trying to make something more realistic and more dynamic. To use these randomizers really does add life to things. So now that we pretty much kind of see what's going on with all these things, we can go ahead and look at the effects. And this is probably the most important one because this is giving us the sense that these strings are mounted to a hollow wooden cabinet. So let's turn it on. Makes a really big difference. And for settings for these sort of things, you can kind of mess around and see what sounds good to you. That's what I did for this. I didn't really look up the resonance frequencies of a bass cabinet or whatever. I just kind of tuned it until it sounded good to me. And of course, the rest of this stuff is just to enhance it a bit and give it some space and so forth. But this resonance bank here is really a huge key if you want something to sound acoustic. It almost always helps a little bit, to give you that feel. So basically, that is what we have here in this PM acoustic bass. Those elements of realism are there to make it sound, like a real deal, but then it's completely changeable and expressible. I have some remote controls here where you can change the character of it. So yeah, this sort of stuff, being able to change those sort of elements is a hallmark of the power of synthesis, as opposed to using samples, although generally samples will sound much closer to the real deal. But I think it's really fun to make a synthesizer like this sound acoustic. Anyway, that's what I have for you for today. I'm going to make some more videos going over some of the other presets that are available in this set of 25 different presets. And if you're interested in them, just sign up for Patreon and I'll send you a link for them. That's all you need to do. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching this video. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a wonderful day. Bye.